As a scientist, I can tell you that Sundays are only 24 hours long. But with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV, you get every game every Sunday all in one place. That's upwards of 30 hours of NFL in one day. How can there be 30 hours in 24 hours, you ask? I have a theory. Magic. New users get NFL Sunday Ticket for 8 payments of $34.50 per month. Sign up at NFLSundayTicket.com. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games and commercial use. Terms and embargoes apply. Availability varies.
More rewards, more savings. With American Express Business Gold, earn up to $395 back in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select shipping, food delivery, and retail subscription merchants, including the $155 Walmart Plus monthly membership credit and $240 flexible business credit. Enjoy the benefits of membership with the Amex Business Gold Card. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
It is Monday, September 8th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you again this week. I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I co-host Split Zone Duo, a national college football podcast. This week, we will talk not just about the latest Grand Slam final between Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, but the Donald Trump appearance that caused delays for thousands and caused the U.S. Tennis Association to censor its own broadcasters and how they presented the event. We'll talk about the fallout from a bombshell report about possible salary cap circumvention, shady companies, and a $28 million no-show job involving the Los Angeles Clippers and Kawhi Leonard. And of course, we will react to a ridiculous first weekend, or at least a ridiculous first Sunday night of the NFL season. The Buffalo Bills, you've truly done it this time. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the key stories of the moment in women's sports. Lindsay, how are you?
I'm hanging in there, Alex. It was a fun first weekend as a football fan, not as a Panthers fan, I would say, in the NFL.
No. I'll spare you from too much Panther banter today, given how things just went.
TM, yeah.
And of course, we've got Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer and co-host of Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing well, and you're probably doing better than Lindsay in a football capacity because your team did well as well, but we'll talk about that. I think football, just one of 6 sports that we're covering in some capacity today. I like a week where we show our range, or perhaps strain our range, but our listeners can be the judge.
I look forward to it. And look, I'm pleased to go 1-0 last week. My only goal is to go 1-0 this week as well, and then in all subsequent weeks. Before we get into trying to go 1-0 this week, as always, we want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. Subscribing helps us make Hang Up. It also allows you to get it ad-free, which is a lovely perk, and you get bonus segments. And there is good news. We've got one that I'm really excited about in the feeds right now. It is about homophobia in the Australian Football League and why the league's efforts to deal with it have so far not worked. You can hear that episode right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus and you can get access wherever you listen.
That our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled
Carlos Alcaraz beat Jannik Sinner in the U.S. Open men's singles final on Sunday in Queens. Basically copy and paste and swap some words around from the way that we have covered all recent men's slam finals in tennis. It was the 8th Grand Slam final in a row for Alcaraz and the 3rd in a row that pitted these two guys against each other. Who knows? There could be 20 or 30 more of them before they're done. This one came in front of a crowd that included Donald Trump, who put your tax dollars to work by taking a huge security detail to the final and causing the match to be delayed as the masses needed extra time to get into Arthur Ashe Stadium. We'll talk about the match, but we'll also talk about what happened beforehand, specifically in an email that the United States Tennis Association sent to tournament broadcasters, which was uncovered by none other than the acclaimed tennis writer and frequent Hang Up and Listen guest, Ben Rothenberg. Ben published this dispatch in his newsletter, Bounces, and it read, in part, Quote, with respect to broadcast coverage, President Trump will be shown on the World feed and the Ashe Court feed during the opening anthem ceremony. We ask all broadcasters to refrain from showcasing any disruptions or reactions in response to the president's attendance in any capacity, including electronic news gathering coverage. Ben, welcome back to Hang Up and Listen.
Thanks for having me, Alex, everybody.
So this is contemptible, bordering on fascist self-censorship by the USTA. I'm glad you reported it. I was sorry to hear that some people couldn't take the truth and unsubscribe to your newsletter because of it. But because the ESPN and other broadcasts didn't really show us what was happening with regards to the on-the-ground response to Trump, we could hear a little bit of booing in that audio clip. They didn't completely drown it out. But I'm wondering if you could tell us from on the ground, what was the reception actually like that the U.S. Tennis Association and its broadcasters really didn't want you to see?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So there are a few moments that I guess could maybe be seen as the moments when Trump was sort of the attention getter in the stadium to varying degrees. So the first one actually happened before I even got in the City Bowl because I didn't go up there when the match had been announced to be delayed for half an hour. Wasn't in my seats for early start, but Trump was there. Trump had already arrived well ahead of time. And so he popped out into the open part of the Rolex suite because Rolex had invited him to this final, almost certainly because of desire for lowered Swiss tariffs, which is a different Trump issue in this moment, that he's so happy to take invitations and such exchanges of favor from any sort of interested party. But yes, he was there in the Rolex suite, and he popped out, and the stadium was maybe about 5 to 10% full already, and some people already noticed him and were maybe clapping and something. And to be clear, there were always some people, especially sitting right in front of the suite, who were like turning and applauding and like asking him for autographs. Those people were always there. There was always a contingent of applause. The anthem, when we knew he was going to get showed, he did get showed indeed during the anthem when that finally happened. The stadium was still probably only about 45% full, I would say, when the anthem happened, even after the 30-40 minute delay to the start of the match, just because of the security headaches, and people were not getting through the sort of airport style security, or airport style even without like conveyor belts. They were really going through and like hand searching every single item in this process for 22,000 people. So it really did take an incredibly long amount of time, and lots of people missed the entire first set of this final. People who spent a lot of money on US Open tickets to get to miss an entire set of a Grand Slam final. And that was when he got showed during the anthem. I would say it was a sort of sudden burst of like noise that was probably mostly negative, some applause, but definitely mostly negative. And then between the first and second sets, he got shown again, and it was much clearer booing. During changeovers on Arthur Ashe Stadium, they always show celebrities, and there's a ton of celebrities there for a men's final. The first stoppage had, I think, like Lindsay Lohan and Pink and Danny DeVito and David Duchovny, like all in one like 15-second burst on the screen. So it's like a overload for people who like A and B list celebrities. And it was definitely negative. The audio in Ashe is very muddled there when the roof is closed, especially. It's this weird cauldron of sound that's been an issue at different times in the tournament. So it was not the clearest sound, but it was a sort of dull moan of displeasure from the crowd when Trump was shown, let's say.
Well, lest we let Donald Trump injecting himself into yet another high-profile sporting event overshadow the athletes, I suppose we should talk about Carlos Alcaraz trumping Jannik Sinner yet again for the 10th time in 15 career matchups and reclaiming the top spot in the rankings. Alcaraz didn't drop a set until the final, was broken only 3 times in the entire tournament. Maybe this wasn't the best version of Sinner. He was forced to retire with an illness in the Cincinnati Open final against Alcaraz, and then was dealing with an abdominal muscle injury in his US Open semifinal. But maybe Alcaraz just learned from his loss at Wimbledon, which he said he studied extensively, while Sinner faulted himself for getting too predictable. So this is the first time in history that 2 men have played each other in 3 consecutive Slam finals within a single season. We've had ample opportunity to talk about these 2 lately, and they've had ample opportunity to feel out each other's weaknesses. So what, if any, new wrinkle did you detect in this matchup, and how do you foresee them continuing to adapt to one another?
Yeah, I think Alcaraz was just better throughout the match. He served really well, and Sinner did not serve well. And so often in men's tennis, it just comes down to how well you're serving a lot of times, and how much percentage of first serves you're making or not. And that's something that was a clear difference in this day. And Alcaraz was winning a ton of points on those first serves, and Sinner was struggling. It's, as you mentioned, the abdominal issue in the semifinal maybe played a role in hampering his serve. But he didn't mention that. He didn't get asked about it directly, at least in the English part of his press conference. But what I was most interested in actually was how Sinner reacted to it. Sinner in his press conference, as you said, called himself too predictable and sort of started talking about having to rebuild his game in order just to be able to beat Alcaraz, because really, Alcaraz has been the one and only hurdle for him in the entire field, and a little bit vice versa, but especially Sinner has this issue with Alcaraz being, I'd say, 1-7 against him since the start of 2024. And these are the important matches. These are Grand Slam finals, and he's having no trouble with anyone else, and neither is Alcaraz. And it's led to this situation where, the first 6 rounds of this tournament, I've never been in a Grand Slam where the finals, Wimbledon and this one, have seemed so clear who's going to make it. And the guys just do it with very little adventure drama. I mean, the first 6 rounds of this men's tournament, I've joked several times, could have been an email. Like these guys are much better, and there was no suspense at all in the tournament until the final. But Sinner was saying he really wants to rebuild. He wants to become less predictable, to add in more variety, and he wants to change his game, even if it means that he becomes potentially more vulnerable at times to the rest of the field in the pursuit of making himself Alcaraz proofed or Alcaraz stronger, whatever that would be. He's willing to do that, which I think is pretty remarkable for someone who just spent more than a year at number one. Just only ended with this loss officially, including a 3-month ban that he still survived at the top ranking. He's willing to do such a transformation in the name of this one guy.
Hey, Ben, you mentioned this point about it could have been an email for the first few rounds. I did want to ask one question about those opening few rounds. I enjoy the mano-a-mano thing that these guys have going. It's obviously going to be one of the great rivalries that we've ever seen in sport, and that's fun. But the one thing, and I do mean the one thing on the men's draw, the women's draw was more interesting that we'll talk about, was how Novak Djokovic just seemed to have the light leave his eyes as Alcaraz squeezed him out in their match leading up to this final. And that had me thinking, and I wanted to ask you about this. Djokovic is a great champion. He's one of the best players ever, and he's still seemingly pretty capable. Like, he looked like he was going to win the second set off of Alcaraz. I believe he won the first 3 games. And then I was watching this guy, this kind of great lion of tennis, just look like he was almost literally dying on the court. Like, and I think he said afterward, after Alcaraz came back in the second set, he was like, I was just cooked physically and or emotionally. Is there a sense that you've picked up covering all these tournaments of how the other players are dealing with the existential creep of knowing that they're in a time of these two guys? And, even Djokovic, who should be who seems to be the most self-confident, even bordering on arrogant guy in the world, just knows that nothing can happen for him.
If I could piggyback on that, he's getting a taste of the medicine that he and Federer and Nadal delivered to the rest of tennis for so long, right? Because he's so good, still arguably the best non-Alcaraz Sinner player, but he's not good enough to break through and get that 25th major because he's blocked by the big 2.
Yeah, no, and it's actually in some ways a full circle moment for Djokovic, because early in his career, he was the clear number 3 behind Federer and Nadal. This Spanish guy who everyone really thought was nifty and a, German speaking mountain boy. It's like a little bit of maybe PTSD for Djokovic there, but he was able to break through that when he was younger and made himself better. I just don't know that he can do that. I think that as he's getting older and more fragile physically and having more injuries and stuff and having just a tough time holding up through 7 matches or 6 matches, only made to 6 matches this year, 6 matches of best of 5 tennis in a 2-week span. He's finding increasingly hard to be at his best when it comes time for the semifinals, just on a physical level even. But he's clearly number 3. He's clearly at the Grand Slams this year, the 3rd best guy at 38, which is remarkable. And yet he's nowhere close to being threatening to those top 2 guys. He did beat Alcaraz in the Australian Open quarterfinals. It was a weird match. Djokovic had an injury, and Alcaraz seemed thrown off by that and confused by how to play this injured Djokovic and wound up losing in 4 sets. But then Djokovic had to withdraw after losing the first set of the semifinal to Alexander Zverev. But otherwise he's been there in these 3 semifinals and just taken these pretty routine losses at the last 3 majors to these guys. And I can't imagine it getting better for him as he nears his, 39th birthday. It's going one direction, and it's remarkable I think should be celebrated that he's been this good still at 38. The same way that I wish that Serena Williams had gotten more of her flowers for, making 4 major finals in her return from maternity leave in her late 30s, even though she got kind of shellacked in all 4 of those finals. Ultimately, she still was making these deep runs. It just wasn't enough.
Yeah, last time none of the former Big Three made a major final in a year, 2002. That was a long time ago.
On the other side of the draw, I mean, quite literally, you have the women's tournament, which is full of unpredictedness early on. But I found a group rising to the top, in a way that's been kind of refreshing. I think you've been able to see some more rivalries form. You're seeing the same players make it to the later stages of Grand Slams. There's just, maybe a group of 12 of them, right? For the final kind of 4 spots, as opposed to, a group of 2 or 3. But I think that the women's semifinal primetime slot is often one of the best nights of tennis of the year. And 100%. This year's was no different. You had Jessica Pegula and Aryna Sabalenka in a rematch of last year's final, where Pegula, once again, I kind of always expect her to just get blown out, which is my bad. And she doesn't get blown out, right? She forces Aryna Sabalenka to come up with her best. Sabalenka, of course, won. And then you had a really fascinating affair between Naomi Osaka and Amanda Anisimova. Amanda Anisimova has one of the most interesting arcs I've seen this summer. Like, we've seen her finally reach her potential. She was a highly touted junior. Her dad died. She took a mental health break, kind of lulled around, came back and made the Wimbledon final, and then gets double bageled by Iga Swiatek. That could be the end of someone, right? Getting double bagel. And she comes right back. She takes out Iga in the quarterfinals here, and she makes it to the semifinals against Naomi Osaka. If you've literally written the book about Naomi Osaka, plug, everyone go get Ben's book on Naomi Osaka. Take us through that match in particular before we start talking about Sabalenka, Anisimova, Osaka. How did Osaka kind of regain her form? Is this real? Like, are we going to continue to see her? And what did you learn from Anisimova?
I think, let's start with Anisimova. The Anisimova win over Swiatek, I think, was the high point of the whole tournament. That was just so remarkable, seeing a player who literally double bageled in this potentially traumatic, embarrassing experience on the biggest stage in tennis, the Wimbledon final, and to see her have the resilience after everything she's also gone through in her career, and Lindsay alluded to a lot of that, to see her come back and win in a major quarterfinal the next time and play so well in that match too, in front of a really supportive crowd. I think it was the best moment of the tournament. Anisimova is not often very effusive in press, but she was really open and articulate and bubbly in her press conference afterwards, and really honest about everything. And it was just, that for me was my favorite day at the Open, was that, seeing that story come so quickly and her redemption moment there. And and then she plays Osaka, who's been having one of the best months or so in women's tennis. She made the Montreal final relatively out of nowhere. I think she was unlocked a bit by stopping with her coach, Patrick Mouratoglou, who was the coach who got a lot of attention and success when he was the coach of Serena Williams, and hasn't been able to replicate that quite the same way. And she stopped and she hired Tomek Viktorovski, who's a more low profile, but still a successful Polish coach who worked with Iga Swiatek during her sort of first dominant period in her career. And Osaka's in great shape physically. She has she did keep her physical trainer, who she worked with in the Mouratoglou Academy, and she just looks incredibly fit. And it all kind of flows from that with Naomi. I've learned when tracing out the arc of her whole career during the book, like, when she's in shape, she can move much better. And when she moves better, she's much more patient in rallies. She's not as sort of panicked to try to end points early, because she doesn't trust her movement or her fitness. And so, she just becomes a different player when she's really, in that sort of shape. And she is that right now. And very well could have won this tournament, I think, really. I mean, she was really playing well in that semifinal, and she's been so good as a closer in the late rounds of slams. Actually, this was her first ever loss in the last 3 rounds of a slam, because before this, she'd only made 4 slam quarterfinals in her career, but she'd gone on to win the title all 4 times. So this was her first semifinal loss as it happened to Anisimova. And I'll just echo your gushing, Lindsay, about that semifinal session. It was so good. Those 2 women's primetime matches, I think, is one of the best tickets in tennis. If you're buying some price gouge tickets to the U.S. Open, might as well be the women's semis. You get 2 semis, 1 night session. It's a good time.
Ben, you cover all these tournaments, and you cover both sides of the draw. And I don't know of anyone who covers tennis in more wide-ranging detail than you do. I'm wondering about this, though, sort of how this moment in tennis has been to cover for you and what you find to be the differences in covering what does seem like a really wide open moment in tennis. I know maybe it sounds a little to say after the number one player goes and wins the U.S. Open, but a fairly wide open moment with a lot of different Grand Slam winners on the women's side versus this men's side that is as clearly a 1v1 as anything can ever be in sport. I'm just wondering, when you're at Roland Garros or you're at Wimbledon or you're here, I don't know if you always go on site to Australia. I should have checked with your travel schedule before.
I did this year anyway. Yeah.
Like, are these fundamentally like different challenges as a reporter to cover, like to find stories on the one side or to not focus too much on just Alcaraz and Sinner on the other?
It's been this year's been an extreme example of a trend we've had before, which is where the women make a lot of noise and news and interest in the first rounds of the tournament, and then the men tend to have their big names left at the ending and have more reliable sort of blockbuster finishes after having slow starts. This year, this U.S. Open felt like the most extreme example of that, because these two guys felt so preordained to make the final, and they weren't meaningfully really challenged or threatened at any point in their 6 rounds, and it just felt like this really perfunctory march to this final, which was highly anticipated, but it's just one match. And it's also a match we've already seen twice this year, so there wasn't like a ton of intrigue in this, sequelization of it's like, a Marvel universe or something, the way these two characters just keep reuniting over and over in these big matches. So we know this dynamic, and it's not always the freshest, but it's still really high level tennis, and there's no doubt they're the best too. And so you're waiting for that as the tournament goes on. But the women, they didn't have tons of upsets this year. They're not big draw breaking upsets really early in the tournament this year for the women. But yeah, there's just a bigger cast of characters. All 8 women who were in the quarterfinals this year's tournament had previously made at least a Grand Slam final before. Like, these were all, the riches have been spread in women's tennis quite a bit over the last, 5-10 years. And so lots of players have these laurels and these accomplishments and these taglines to their names, which makes them familiar. You have like Marketa Vondrousova, who maybe is not familiar to most, casual tennis fans, but she has a Wimbledon title to her name, and she was in the quarterfinals of this tournament. Same with Barbara Krejcikova, who's won 2 Grand Slams. Karolina Mukova, those are all, I named 3 Czech women for some reason. Those are all, players who tennis fans know and get to see in these late rounds. So I think it's a really good long form time for the women. I think, there's this ensemble cast. It still does have a compelling, clear leader in Sabalenka, who, as you said, defended her title and, made at least semifinals of all 4 slams this year. She was runner up in both Australia and Paris. For her to win, I think women's tennis just competitively on paper is in a healthier spot right now, but you don't know that you're going to get the blockbuster, occasion finals all the time. There definitely have been some finals that have been, like the previous one before this one was a double bagel at Wimbledon. Like, it's not always a guaranteed classic, in the late rounds the same way as maybe the men might be having right now.
No shortage of early round drama if you like unwritten rules, though, as I afterballed last week, highlighted or lowlighted by the Taylor Townsend-Yelena Ostapenko confrontation. Yeah. But if you're into tennis etiquette, this was the tournament for you. Let me leave you with one question. Since we are sort of staring at a future, a mostly exciting future of the next decade of Alcaraz and Sinner just going head to head, you mentioned Marvel, so let's do a multiversal scenario for you here, since we're searching for someone else.
This is not my forte, but I will try.
Who could compete with these two guys. If you could have current Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner face peak big 3, any of the big 3 at their best, is there a match that you would most like to see? And if I had to put you on the spot and say, are these guys already better than those guys were at their best? Not in terms of career accolades, but just you got to win one match. Give me your thoughts.
I'd like to see them, just like curiosity, play Federer, because neither of them either played Federer. They didn't overlap with Federer long enough to get to play Federer. They played a couple of the same draws, I guess. 2021 Wimbledon, they would have both been there. All 3 of them would have been there, but they didn't overlap on court. Yeah, I would say I would be interested in all of the permutations possible. I do think Nadal on clay is still his own beast. I think that would still be a high mountain to climb. But every other scenario, I do think these guys could have been competitive. And just the way that they are really look like they're hitting a fast forward button on how their tennis looks in terms of how they move and how fast they hit the ball. I would have been very interested to see them play. These peak big 3 guys who are not so far apart from them in chronology. It's not like asking them to play Rod Laver or something. I mean, it's it's plausible, and it'd be interesting to see how these guys would adapt and react. And I do think the big three, both being so good, all three of them being so good at offense and defense, kind of did make a template that these guys have followed and maybe leveled up in some way. But it's not a given that any of the matches would go a certain way. Again, I think Nadal and Clay is still the sort of ultimate, and I would favor him over any of the newer guys. But everything else, peak to peak, I think would be a fascinating toss-up.
He is Ben Rothenberg. You can read his newsletter, Bounces, at benrothenberg.com. Ben, thank you for coming back on Hang Up and Listen.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Lindsay, Ben, everybody.
Up next, we will circumvent the typical limits on how many good segments podcasters are allowed to have in one episode.
When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
Hiring shouldn't be a hassle or a drain on your budget. Upwork is your one-stop shop to find, hire, and pay top freelance talent, saving you time and keeping costs in check. Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way they staff key projects and initiatives. Upwork's global marketplace is filled with top talent in IT, web dev, AI, design, admin support, marketing, and more. Posting a job on Upwork is easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelancer profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. From there, you can connect with freelancers and easily hire them. Upwork makes the entire process simpler and more affordable with industry-low fees. Post a job today and hire tomorrow with Upwork. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That is UPWORK.com, Upwork.com. Last week, the journalist Pablo Torre, via his podcast Pablo Torre Finds Out, broke one of the biggest sports business stories we've seen in a little while. Torre reported on a contractual arrangement between Los Angeles Clippers star Kawhi Leonard and a sketchy-looking green energy company called Aspiration, whose investors include none other than Clippers owner Steve Ballmer, the early days Microsoft CEO who is orders of magnitude richer than even his peers in NBA ownership and most sports team owners in general. Torre's report was very detailed, and I'm a little hesitant to describe it in a segment intro for fear that I will leave out some important details, but I'll give you the basics. Kawhi Leonard, according to this report, got a $28 million contract from this green energy company to do either zero or very little endorsement work in an arrangement that Torre has described as both a no-show job and an explicit effort by the Clippers to circumvent the NBA's salary cap by moving money through the company and to Leonard, who already has the maximum allowed deal under the NBA's collective bargaining agreement. The Clippers deny that they were up to any cap circumvention. Ballmer says that he was conned and that this company, in which he has invested, acted without his knowledge. Torre's reporting looks strong to me, and the NBA is obviously looking into this with an outside law firm leading an investigation. What's interesting to me about this is the fissure that it might reveal between Steve Ballmer and his other owners in the NBA. We often think of sports team owners as a monolith who are all committed collectively to keeping as much money as they can away from their players. But Torre's report, Ben, at least makes me ask the question, is it that black and white?
No, not necessarily. I think there are always factions within ownership groups, and sometimes the owner-on-owner disputes can be just as contentious as the owner versus player disputes. Sometimes that contributes to work stoppages because you have big market versus small market, or unimaginably wealthy versus imaginably but still fantastically wealthy owners. So we saw this sort of division in MLB not long ago with Steve Cohen, who is rich even compared to other rich owners, and thus led to a lot of sniping and condemnation because essentially he was trying too hard. Now, Cohen's someone who's been under suspicion in his financial dealings of doing something improper, but not so much on a baseball level to this point. But Ballmer, obviously, this is a case where, look, it's a red meat story. I think any hint that a team is trying to get an unfair advantage is going to rile people up. And whenever you have a salary cap and a pretty hard cap, there's always going to be an incentive to skirt it somehow. And sometimes there are legal ways to do that, at least until the league cracks down, just having extremely long deals to try to lower the average annual value, that sort of thing. But sometimes there's something more nefarious. And obviously there's history of this in the NBA. The Joe Smith scandal has been making the rounds in recent days. And the figures involved in this very story, of course, Ballmer was fined $250,000 by the league a decade ago for offering DeAndre Jordan a deal from Lexus as part of the team's free agency pitch. And then Kawhi Leonard's free agency, there was a lot of reporting around that before this whole deal surfaced. But back in 2019, with him and/or his uncle Dennis Robertson asking for improper sweeteners, essentially. So when you have these names and this sexy a rumor, it's going to be a big story, and understandably and rightfully it is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in the WNBA, there have been these stories recently about, the Las Vegas Aces circumventing the salary cap with these NIL-like deals with the players. And I think that it's understandable in the WNBA because the salary cap is so hard. The money is so limited. But it's a bit harder to fully wrap your head around when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. You get to the point where you're like, when is enough? But I think what interested me the most about this story, beyond the way it was reported, which I do want to talk a little bit about what Pablo is doing with his podcast and the way he's presenting investigative journalism. But I think the story itself is how easy it would have been to make this seem kind of within the rules, right? Had the contract just required Kawhi to do a few things, to actually make a few appearances. The contract seemingly was written in a way that Kawhi did not have to do anything at all. Every single thing was optional, in order for him to earn this money. And yet you wonder, well, what if they had made it so that he just had to do a few tweets and show up at a few events? Then even if Ballmer did arrange this under the table, would that have been legit, right? And so then what are we getting up in arms about? Like, are these all technicalities? I don't know. I kind of have been going in circles.
Ben, I'm really interested in the situation that this creates for Adam Silver. This is obviously, as you're talking about sort of in your opening, there's a long history of commissioners needing to mediate fights between different factions of owners and different specific owners. But I think that this relationship between the Clippers and the rest of the NBA is so interesting because of the history that you mentioned with like the DeAndre Jordan courtship and Kawhi's courtship, and just the fact that Ballmer, because of how he made his money, has so much of it and is on such a different playing field than your typical sports team owner. Ballmer is almost more comparable to like a sovereign wealth fund. Granted, those are bigger than him too, but he's almost more comparable to the Saudi group that owns Live Golf than he is to a typical garden variety billionaire who owns a sports team. And we've done segments on this show over the last year or so about how in a number of sports, most notably the NFL, the composition of ownership groups is changing. The NFL is liberalizing its rules about like which types of funds or private equity groups can get involved with teams. And one of the things that the NFL has done to that effect is, private equity can now own, or asset management groups can now own teams, but they can only take so much control because these big, faceless, massively wealthy organizations are not supposed to be sort of the front men for a sports team. They're not supposed to take an active role in how the thing runs. But Ballmer is so rich, and he's an individual with a personality who likes to be visible in the arena and with the team's fans, that it feels like this might just be the whale that you really can't wrangle. And let's say that this law firm investigation that the NBA has undertaken or that they've commissioned does turn out to be very damning for the Clippers. Like, what are you really going to do to Steve Ballmer? You know?
Yeah, you can't really hurt him in terms of his personal fortune, but you can hurt the competitive fortunes of his basketball team potentially. And so I do wonder what the standard of evidence has to be here. If you watch Pablo's podcast or listen to it, he presents this information in a very compelling way. It's pretty persuasive. It's fishy as hell, certainly at minimum here. I guess the question is, can you document a proven link? Can you show that Ballmer knew exactly what he was doing here and directed it? Will there be plausible deniability? And, you know, maybe fellow billionaires have each other's backs. Mark Cuban came out and said, well, maybe he just got scammed by scammers because that's what this company was. And then, of course, he subsequently went on Pablo's podcast to hash that out. But that's the question, I guess. Yes, maybe it's hard to take him down. Then again, is there value in making an example of someone so prominent who seems like he might be above the law to say that no, even Steve Ballmer can't monkey with these rules and regulations. They apply to everyone. And do you need a paper trail, a digital trail of him directing someone, yes, let's do this to circumvent the cap? Or is just the appearance of impropriety, which this certainly is, and that does damage to a league, is that enough for a commissioner to step in and slap someone down, even if it's not as severe a penalty as we've seen in the past? Just some sort of penalty to say that even if you're giving the impression of something nefarious happening here, that's not something that we want happening with our league.
Lindsay, do you feel the same sort of awkward moral calculus that I feel about this? It's like, it feels like someone might have been caught red-handed breaking the rules, and he's a mega many times over billionaire. So you sort of have this desire to see him punished out of a sense of fairness, but also the alleged transgression here is just giving more money to his employees, which, is not the worst thing that an owner has ever done.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how I should feel about this overall, and I don't really know.
I agree. And that's what I said earlier. Like, I think part of the outrage here is that the way the contract was written was pretty explicit as far as this guy needs to do nothing. He will collect $28 million. And that's just such a large amount of money for no work. Of course, in reality, his work is showing up to play basketball. So, he actually does have a very demanding job, but it is hard to care, which is why I think I'm almost more interested in the media side of this story, which is how Pablo Torre got this, found these documents and uncovered this scandal by looking at the bankruptcy filings from the company in question, this tree planting company. And, is this how investigative journalism is going to be done now, with just kind of these gotcha moments in video podcast form? And is that okay because at least investigative journalism is being done?
Yeah, I'm interested in the aftermath of Pablo's reports here. And he's on a run like Ronan Farrow was on a few years ago in terms of just the frequency of bombshell reports and the variety.
Not quite as consequential.
Perhaps the sports equivalent of that. We like to pretend that sports matters. It does to some extent, but and just the variety of things that he's reporting on, the pace at which he's reporting. And this is happening after his stint at ESPN, and someone might think, oh, ESPN, they would be the newsbreakers. That's sort of the traditional media relationship. Obviously, Pablo's podcast now is affiliated with The Athletic, so there is sort of like legacy media tie there to the Times through that, but this has been more of an independent entity to this point. And so Torre's coming in and throwing these bombs and stirring the shit and, with good journalistic rigor and standards and sourcing and everything. But then suddenly everyone else comes out of the woodwork and continues the reports. And we talked about how ESPN picked up and ran with Torre's reporting about the NFLPA and the secret agreement in the NFL collusion case. And here, as soon as this podcast comes out, all the major news outlets are reporting on it and citing his report. And then you have subsequent reports, this outlet Boston Sports Journal, which is reporting that actually it was more than 28 million. Maybe it was close to double that. So he's kind of getting the ball rolling. And I don't know whether that is just because there are more guardrails, there's more red tape with other organizations, or whether that's just a testament to his reporting acumen, which I think it is. But I do wonder, just as we see less and less investment in sort of standard traditional reporting, or major media outlets being cowed and being afraid to go after leagues that it has relationships with, or the administration for that matter, and everyone moves to Substack and their own podcasts, then is this going to be more and more what we see? And, as long as the truth comes out, maybe it doesn't matter in what form.
Yeah, it is a substantial thing, speaking as someone who has done, as have you, as have we all three of us have our own independent media operations outside of this. The lack of legal infrastructure, the lack of, fact-checking teams that are associated with these publications, the lack of sort of legacy media bells and whistles, it doesn't encourage you to do this kind of work, to spend the months that it takes to do this kind of work, only to probably get a letter from a guy who can afford as many $1,000 billable hours from his lawyers as his heart's desire, and then maybe not do it or get bullied out of doing it because you don't have the legal resources to stand up to the people you're investigating. It's an extremely concerning trend, and one that I can't claim to have really done anything about as someone who is part of this move towards independent media in many ways. Anyway.
On that uplifting note.
Week 1 in the National Football League. We'll talk about it right after the break.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Insurance may all seem the same on the surface, but having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like getting a speech from your third cousin's +1 at your wedding when you needed a speech from your best man. You wouldn't settle for just any speech, so don't settle for just any insurance. When it comes to getting the help you need, State Farm is the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This episode is brought to you by Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels and music are made for each other. They share a rhythm in the craft of making something timeless, while being a part of legendary nights. From backyard jams to sold-out arenas, there's a song in every toast. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Jack Daniels and Old No. 7 are registered trademarks. Tennessee whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Jack Daniel Distillery, Lynchburg, Tennessee.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
Quite a first weekend of the National Football League. Really what I mean by that is quite a Sunday night football game. There were some good games over the course of the weekend, but what happened on Sunday night in Orchard Park, New York was really incredible. The Buffalo Bills came back from 15 down late in the fourth quarter to beat the Baltimore Ravens in just a fire drill of a game, with a fire drill of a field goal as the clock was running and the Bills trotted out their 40-something-year-old kicker just signed off the street, Matt Prater, who rushed onto the field, got the kickoff with about a second or two left, and made the kick to win the game. One of the great comebacks, one of the great quarterback games you will ever see from Josh Allen, the reigning MVP, and husband to Haley Steinfeld, of course. Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers won a shootout with Rodgers' old team, the New York Jets, winning on a 60-yard field goal by Chris Boswell, whose head coach Mike Tomlin referred to him as a serial killer after the game. The Cleveland Browns held the Cincinnati Bengals to negative yardage in the second half and still managed to lose, a real feat of Brownsdom in a time where there have been many. And NFL Red Zone aired commercials, much to the chagrin of millions. Lindsay Gibbs, what was the biggest new thing that you learned or opinion change that you underwent in the first weekend of games of this NFL season?
I guess it's not new, but I returned to fantasy football this year and learned that I am very bad at it. You mentioned that the Bengals scored no points in the second half of that game. Joe Burrow was my quarterback. So, we're off to a rough start here. But no, in reality, like my love-hate, love relationship with this sport and this league just continues to soar. There's so much wrong with it, and yet Sunday was fantastic. Panthers showing aside. I think for me, the biggest takeaway was just that Bills Ravens game is one I'm going to remember for a long, long time. And I think that has overtaken Bills Chiefs to me as like the rivalry, the matchup I want to see because of how explosive both teams are. But overall, I mean, listen, Aaron Rodgers with the Steelers, I didn't see that coming. Learned something, I guess, new there. A lot of teams looked better than expected. Justin Fields, and I didn't think Justin Fields really had that game in him. You also continued to go. I mean, we talked about the Daniel Jones thing. Daniel Jones and the Indianapolis Colts looked unstoppable. Now, given that might be because the Miami Dolphins could be historically bad. But it was certainly a good start of the seasons for the Colts. So I think the Packers look fantastic, and I'm worried about Detroit. I'm excited for this season, maybe in a way I haven't before, probably because it's what we talked about, where it feels wide open. I mean, the Kansas City certainly didn't look unbeatable, and the Eagles looked good, but also not unbeatable. So it seems like there are some really good teams.
Yeah, I don't know if it surprised me so much as it confirmed some things that we thought or hoped, and certainly entertained me. That Chiefs-Chargers game in Brazil, that was a close loss. That was the kind of game that maybe last year somehow Kansas City sneaks out with a win, and we all wonder, are they actually this good? Do they have some sort of Mahomes magic? And that magic ran out in this game. And so as they're looking vulnerable, and then you see just the Bills and the Ravens going head to head in this classic game. I mean, it was like Lamar for 3/4 of the game, basically, and then Allen crammed an entire game's worth of quarterback performance into the last quarter of it. I think the Bills were down to a 1% win probability before the comeback, so that was pretty incredible. And then, yeah, we talked about the high expectations for the Packers after the trade and whether their defense would be better, and sure looks like it would. I think they held the Lions to fewer points than the Lions scored in any game last season, so there was a little bit of confirmation bias setting in week one, things going, oh, yes, this is proceeding exactly as we planned. Though I guess you can't count Rodgers in that category because we didn't see a whole lot of that version of Rodgers when he was playing for the Jets. Are you suddenly feeling more bullish about the Rodgers-Steelers era, Alex?
A little bit, yeah. It would have been nice if the Steelers defense could have stopped anything at all over the course of the game. But I thought it was encouraging that Rodgers threw 3 touchdown passes off of play action. That's the calling card of the Steelers offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, who's also a FedEx heir, by the way, part of the illustrious Smith clan. former Atlanta Falcons coach. So, the fact that the scheme was working with the quarterback was appealing. Lindsay, I do have to ask you, and, we bantered about this a bit in the opener, but are you okay with regards to the Panthers situation? Is it back to like a DEFCON 1 with Bryce Young, or are we chalking it up to weird game? There was a weather delay. Things aren't as bad as they seem for the Panthers.
Listen, I'll never go DEFCON 1 after week 1. I'm just not that person, but it didn't look great. And I think the coaching looked particularly awful. To get outplayed and outclassed by the Jaguars was a little bit embarrassing. So I'm okay, but I expect better.
As you noted, Alex, Rodgers was sacked 4 times in this game, and he had to do a lot to transcend the holes in the defense. So on a 41-year-old body who's been beaten up and missed time, if that continues, I don't know that excellence will continue, because that's going to take a toll.
No. Ideally, your 40-plus quarterbacks who have recently torn Achilles tendons, or tendon singular, are not great candidates to be sacked that many times and come out of it feeling healthy. I suppose we should talk about the biggest football storyline of the week, which was all of the spitting that was being done. The star defensive tackle of the Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Carter, spit on Dak Prescott
immediately
before a defensive down was even played on Thursday night. The loogie at the link, they're calling it. I'm actually calling it that.
Yeah.
And that only preceded what has been dubbed the spit at the swamp in college football on Saturday, when a Florida Gator spit at an opponent. Florida then lost to USF in one of the big upsets of the early college football season.
Boys are so gross. Boys are so gross.
It's an epidemic.
Football's coming from baseball's crown as the spittiest sport.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about football spit is that unlike baseball players, you don't really have a spit cup on you throughout the game. Nor do you have like a natural spot on the dugout to just kind of put your spit cup on the ledge and just drop loogies into it. You can't carry a tin of chewing tobacco in your back pocket on a football field. The pants are just a little bit too tight. You're getting tackled too much. It could be a safety hazard. So I suppose you just have to let it fly out there in the field of play and just see where it lands. I suppose the biggest kind of panic concern index team of the week might be the Detroit Lions, who were the victims of the Micah Parsons pass rushing fest. I think he only had 1 sack, but he really abused Penei Sewell, the all-pro right tackle of the Lions. And if I were a Detroit Lions fan, I'd probably be looking at Parsons with a bit of panic, like, oh no, for the next 5 to 8 years, we're going to be dealing with that twice a year. The Ravens losing a game in which they get 8 yards per play. A couple of Super Bowl contenders really humbled. Ben, was there anybody who you would be extra panic moded about after one weekend?
Yeah, I would have mentioned the Lions. I mean, they were so good last year, but obviously they did have some key departures, player retirements, Ben Johnson, the former offensive coordinator. So perhaps that's telling, perhaps that's indicative, or maybe it's just a superpowered Green Bay defense just having its way with them. But that probably stood out. I guess you could also mention Russell Wilson's performance with the Giants, which was not great. And the Jackson Dart calls have already started in my home city here, which is possibly premature or not great for Dart's long-term development. Who knows? But you can see why, because of that performance. And those calls are only going to get louder if that continues.
We'll see, but I hope that you were ready for some football. We certainly were at Hang Up and Listen headquarters.
Alex, how are you feeling though about your team? About your team?
Great. Overall great.
Like it's
Overall
weird,
great.
right? It's Aaron Rodgers.
Overall great. He's going to Canton as a Steeler rather than as a Packer.
Yeah, are you fully converted? Like, is this
17-0 plus 3-0 in the playoffs, 20-0?
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to it. But I'm also looking forward to Afterballs this week. The kicker who went ahead and kicked that game-winning field goal last night for the Buffalo Bills, is Matt Prater, who is 41 years and 29 days old today. An interesting thing about Matt Prater is that when he kicked through this game-winning chip shot field goal last night for the Bills, actually, he'd already made a field goal in this game, but when he made his first field goal on Sunday Night Football, it was actually the 5th presidential administration under which Matt Prater made a field goal. He debuted with the 2007 Falcons, where he was filling in for one Morton Anderson. Morton Anderson was a 4th-round pick, 86th overall out of Michigan State in the 1982 NFL draft. So that is a teammate of Matt Prater's, a guy who was drafted in 1982, as Morton Anderson was. There was actually a second kicker drafted that year. In fact, a few more kickers. And the second kicker drafted in 1982 was, in fact, also an Anderson. This one, Gary Anderson, a 7th-round pick, 171st overall by the Bills, who cut him after training camp. But Gary Anderson, much like Morton, was not deterred. Morton went on to a Hall of Fame career. Gary Anderson made 4 Pro Bowls and kicked for the Steelers and a handful of other teams across a 23-year NFL career. Made a couple of all-decade teams, I do believe, as given out by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. If you wanted a good kicker named Anderson, the 1982 NFL Draft was the time to find one. And so, Ben, I am asking, what's your Anderson brother of the week?
Well, you went back to the 80s with that intro. I'm going to go back to the 60s and 70s because 2 greats of their respective sports, Ken Dryden and Davey Johnson, died on Friday. And I couldn't help but see some parallels in the histories of 2 men whose playing careers ended about 8 months apart and whose lives ended on the same day. Dryden, who was 78, was a Hockey Hall of Famer. Johnson, who was 82, has come up short on 5 committee ballots for the Baseball Hall of Fame, though he's the sort of figure who'd definitely be enshrined if Cooperstown considered holistic contributions as a player and manager. On a rate basis, they're 2 of the greatest winners in sports history, but in my mind, their greatest mutual legacy is as cerebral, restless Renaissance men. Dryden had a short but illustrious playing career. He was the goalie for the 1970s Montreal Canadiens dynasty, winning the Stanley Cup 6 times in 8 seasons, including 4 in a row from 76 to 79. He won the Calder and Conn Smythe trophies as a rookie. In fact, he's the only player to win the Conn Smythe trophy for being the most valuable player in the playoffs before winning the Calder for being the Rookie of the Year. He won the Vezina Trophy, which was awarded to the goalie on the team that allowed the fewest goals 5 times, and he also made 5 All-Star games and was named as one of the NHL's 100 greatest players in 2017. Because he played for such great teams and stopped playing after his age 31 season before he had a decline phase, his career save percentage and goals against average figure are 2 of the best ever, and he had an incredible .790 winning percentage. Johnson also played for a dynastic or near-dynastic team, Earl Weaver's Orioles, of the late 60s and early 70s. He played in 3 consecutive World Series from 69 through 71, winning the one in the middle. And even before Weaver arrived, he won a title in 1966 when he recorded the last hit off of Sandy Koufax during Baltimore's 4-game sweep of the Dodgers. Johnson was a Gold Glover at second base in each of his pennant-winning seasons with Weaver and also made 4 All-Star teams. He played longer than Dryden, though not at as elite a level, and unlike Dryden, he was overshadowed on teams that included legends like Frank Robinson, Brooks Robinson, and Jim Palmer. But he was still a solid player who took walks to go with his Gold Gloves, and right after leaving the O's, he had one wild, out-of-character power year for the 1973 Braves when he hit 43 homers, as many as he had in any 3 other seasons combined. Both players went to school during their playing days. While Johnson was hitting his 43 homers, Dryden, who had a bachelor's in history from Cornell, was completing a law degree at McGill in a 1-year hiatus from hockey. Johnson had a bachelor's in math from Trinity University, learned computer programming, and between the 1968 and 69 seasons, took classes at Johns Hopkins, where he created a computer program called Optimization of the Orioles Lineup that suggested that Earl Weaver, good as he was leaving lots of runs on the table with his batting orders. He shared his insight with the O's manager, who did not take kindly to the printouts Johnson prepared. Earl threw it into the wastebasket, Johnson said. Maybe Weaver was suspicious because Johnson's analysis said the club's Gold Glove second baseman should hit higher in the lineup. For both players, calling it quits as a player was a prelude to different occupations and additional distinctions. So Dryden didn't have a decline phase during his career or after it. He did it all in his post-playing days. He wrote one book while he was a goalie and 9 more afterward, most notably the 1983 classic The Game, which documented his final season with the Habs and ranks right up there with the likes of The Long Season, Ball 4,
So
and
good.
A False Spring.
One of the best.
Yeah.
One of the best ever.
Yeah, among athletes' books about being on the field. Among the greatest athletes, I'd put Dryden, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Arthur Ashe as the greatest writers, Joe Posnanski opined on Sunday. Dryden didn't just write books. Like me, he had a bunch of bylines at Grantland, where he sounded the alarm about hockey head injuries. And he also wrote for The Atlantic, where in 2021, he did a great piece headlined, "Hockey Has a Gigantic Goalie Problem." He would know, at 6'4", he was known as the 4-story goalie and that thieving giraffe. And his height caused him to lean on his stick during stoppages, which became his signature pose and led to another apt nickname, the Thinker. Although he had cancer, Dryden kept publishing almost up to the end. In February, he wrote a piece for The Atlantic called "Canada is Taking Trump Seriously and Personally." Dryden was qualified to weigh in on politics, too. He served as a Liberal member of Parliament from his native Ontario from 2004 to 2011 and was named to the Canadian Cabinet as Minister of Social Development from 2004 to 2006. Writing and politicking were 2 of his several post-hockey incarnations. He also had a stint as the Maple Leafs president, taught a course at McGill, and worked as a hockey commentator in the 80s, most famously teaming up with Al Michaels as the color commentator for ABC's broadcast of The Miracle on Ice. Johnson, of course, also attended a school of sorts by studying the managers he played for, which helped prepare him for a brilliant career as a skipper himself. He didn't compile quite as high a career regular season winning percentage as Weaver's .583, but his .562 is one of the highest of any manager who isn't in the Hall. And he was a winning manager in 4 different decades, beginning with his time in New York, where he managed the Mets to a title in 1986 and came 1 win away from a pennant 2 years later. After that, he took the Reds and the Orioles to the championship series and pulled the Washington Nationals out of the basement and managed them to their first playoff appearance, breaking in Bryce Harper in the process. Johnson also spent 2 seasons with the Dodgers under GM Kevin Malone, who once said that baseball was controlled by Satan, and now works for Donald Trump and RFK Jr. as a senior advisor on human trafficking. Johnson was a 2-time manager of the year, a player's manager, and a proto-sabermetric manager who preached platooning and on-base percentage. He often wore out his welcome quickly with executives and owners, but he shows up high on any list that tries to quantify manager value based on overperformance by players or teams. As my former co-author and co-podcaster Sam Miller posted on Blue Sky on Saturday, the division finishes of every team Johnson was managing on opening day went like this: 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2. Reading long lists of numbers makes for great podcasting, but it did make for great finishes for his teams. He also won bronze in the 2009 World Baseball Classic after Team USA finished 8th in the inaugural tournament in 2006. As a manager and even as a player, Johnson was never a cellar dweller. Davey Johnson was the greatest manager I ever played for, Darryl Strawberry said on Saturday, and Straw played for future Hall of Famer Dusty Baker and Hall of Famers Tommy Lasorda and Joe Torre, too. Johnson's extracurricular exploits were less public-facing than Dryden's, but they've still merited prominent placement in various remembrances. The 3rd paragraph of his New York Times obit says, known as one of the game's brainier and more self-assured characters, Johnson was an unusual figure in the world of baseball with a wide range of off-the-field interests and achievements. The obit's author, Bruce Weber, notes that Johnson was a scratch golfer, a wealthy real estate investor, a licensed pilot, an accomplished fisherman, and a scuba diving instructor. That mirrors the 2nd paragraph in Dryden's obit at The Athletic, which lists his later careers and calls him a fascinating intellectual beyond the rink. These 2 guys crammed a lot of living into their 80-ish years. Dryden and Johnson were each survived by a wife and 2 children, and they're also survived by their images as athletes who broke the mold in a conformist, specialist sports world by refusing to do or be defined by any one thing. I like the feeling of doing something well, Dryden said in 2017. He and Johnson enjoyed that feeling not only by repeatedly reaching the pinnacle of their first professions, but by cultivating success in their subsequent ones. They were jacks of all trades and masters of some.
That was very nice, Ben. A lovely remembrance of these two fellows. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
That is all for this episode of Hang Up and Listen. We also have a special bonus show that is in the podcast feed right now if you are a Slate Plus member. It's about rampant homophobia in the Australian Football League, or seemingly so, and why the league's nominal efforts to root it out have so far not done the job. To hear it, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thank you for listening.
Popsicles, sprinklers, a cool breeze. Talk about refreshing. You know what else is refreshing this summer? A brand new phone with Verizon. Yep, get a new phone on any plan with Select Phone Trade-in and My Plan. And lock down a low price for 3 years on any plan with My Plan. This is a deal for everyone, whether you're a new or existing customer. Swing by Verizon today for our best phone deals. 3-year price guarantee applies to then current base monthly rate only. Additional terms and conditions apply for all offers.